My name and I'll be one of your background moderators for today's presentation along with Christy Rugg. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few logistics. Please be aware that today's webinar session is being live captioned and the link is provided in the chat box shortly, as well as it's being recorded. Whether you are using computer or phone audio, please mute your microphone and or your telephone microphone for the duration of the webinar. Also, please make sure your camera is turned off so that we can make sure our interpreters are all easily, you can see them easily. Do not put the call on hold for any reason, as it will disrupt the audio for everyone. You may use the chat section at any time during the session to communicate with the webinar host and alert us to any technical difficulties. Please make sure you're muted if you're not presenting today. Thank you. There will not be slides for today's presentation. However, the presentation will be recorded and archived on the Common Learning portal for later reference. The question and answer portion of the webinar will occur near the end of the hour-long discussion. To ask a question during this portion of the call, either submit it into the chat section or click the raise your hand button so that we can unmute you when the time is appropriate. Additionally, we'll be adding a Federal Relay brochure to the chat box, and that'll be shortly. With that, I'll turn it over to our moderator for the discussion today, Ray Bloomer.
Thank you, Cecily. My name is Ray Bloomer, and I am with the Accessibility Support Program out of WASO. And this is the fourth call of the Disability Dialogue series. Today's topic is on Fed Relay. Our panelists today are Kirsten Kemp from Fed Relay, and she's a outreach specialist with Fed Relay. Tatiana Messin-Sneva is also with Fed Relay as the account specialist, and we also have Katie Day. Katie Day is with rec.gov, formerly with the National Park Service, and she has also been a board member with the ERG, Employees for the Advancement of People with Disabilities. What I'd like to do right now is to ask each of our panelists if they wouldn't mind introducing themselves, giving a little bit of their background as far as what they do, and also a little bit about their disability. Kirsten, if you wouldn't mind starting off.
And this is Kirsten. Sure. I'm sorry. I am actually not able to see the other interpreter, so I just want to make sure that Susan, the other interpreter, can see me, and she is able to see me. So, Ray, you are moderating the event today, correct? We're having an issue with the interpreters not being able to see all of the panelists.
Okay, I am moderating. I am only by phone, and I am not do not have a camera available.
Okay, so we have agreed. Kirsten cannot see Susan, one of the interpreters. She only can see Jenny, the other interpreter. So Jenny will be doing the signing so that Kirsten can continue to see her. I am not sure if there are other people in the audience who also need to see an interpreter, and if they are able to see both Jenny and Susan interpret or not.
This is Christy. For anyone who needs to see the interpreters, if you look for the screens that say Jenny Thomas and Susan Thompson Gaines, next to their name there are 3 little dots. If you click on that, you can pin those 2 videos along with the videos of the 3 panelists to your screen, and you will see those videos specifically. please add questions to the chat if you're having difficulty with this, and I can troubleshoot it on the side.
And this is Kirsten speaking. The reason why I'm a little thrown off is I know there are 2 interpreters online and I only can see one of those interpreters. Tatiana, I want to make sure you are able to see.
Yeah, Kirsten, this is Tatiana. What I did, because I couldn't see you, I clicked at the top, the 3 dots. So there's the 2 people, there's a chat box, the hand, and then the 3 dots. And instead of gallery, I clicked on together mode. It says together mode preview in parentheses. And I'm able to see all of us, the panelists and the 2 interpreters. That's how I was able to, I was playing with it while we were trying to figure this out.
Visual description, we're seeing Kirsten looking on her screen to change to that setting.
Do you see that together mode?
This is Kirsten. I'm doing together mode. All I can see though is one interpreter. I can't see the other people. So I think maybe I will pin specific people. One moment. Ray, and this is Kirsten. Kate, I don't know if you are going to be, or Kathleen, if you are on the panel or not. I'm not able to see you either. And Kate said, I'm not sure if you can see me, Kirsten, but I can see you. And this is Kirsten speaking. All right. I'm not sure if people in the audience can see me. There'll be one interpreter voicing for me, the other interpreter I can't see. I'm not sure if the other interpreter can see me or not. So that's the communication concern with not clearly seeing everyone.
Okay. So, as we discussed at first,
Can you please mute if you're not one of the presenters? Thank you.
This is Kirsten speaking. All right. I guess we'll start because we do need to do the introductions. My name is Kirsten Kempf, and I work with the Federal Relay team. I am the outreach specialist and the marketing leader for the team. I just joined this team October of last year. I'm very excited to be here today to talk with all of you. Obviously, COVID, the pandemic has hit. It's hit people with disabilities as it has hit the general population as well. So I'm here to talk to you about what Federal Relay can do for you, and I'm excited to join today. Tatiana?
Thank you. My name is Tatiana Miezintseva. I am based in Colorado, and I manage the Federal Relay account. And I started with Sprint Accessibility in 2013, and I started managing the Federal Relay account in 2016. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for joining us. And Katie, if you would introduce yourself.
And hold on one second. We're having interpreter difficulties because Kirsten cannot see Kate. Jenny, can you see Kate?
I can somewhat, yes.
Okay.
She's freezing for me. You're freezing for me.
Yes. So Katie is going to go ahead and voice for herself because her video is freezing. So one moment as she turns her voice on.
My name is that better? So,
Yes.
my name is Katie Day. If you're looking for me to pin, it says Kathleen Day. The Forest Service requires that you use your proper legal name. So there we are. I have been a Fed Relay user since 2012. I have been a general relay user since 2005, something like that. I have used various relay services in lieu of the phone. That is not within my abilities. I worked for the National Park Service for 8 years, and now I work for recreation.gov, which services 7 different agencies. And so they have asked me to be a part of this as a relay user, so that I can share some of my experiences, my frustrations, my compliments, and all of the above.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Fed Relay, the reason we've had this as a topic is something that a lot of people are starting to use. The primary beneficiaries of Fed Relay are people who are deaf and people who are hard of hearing. And I would like each of you, if you wouldn't mind, just to talk a very little bit in terms of a little bit about your own disability, so that our audience will have an understanding that people who are deaf and people who are hard of hearing are different from each other. So Kirsten, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your own disability.
Kirsten here. Sure, I'm happy to. Let me just introduce myself again. My name is Kirsten. I'm from Colorado, relocated to DC. Let me tell you a little bit about my experience. I identify as deaf. My family all can hear, so I've had a wide variety of experiences. Some people I know decide to use services based on their need. My service of choice is Video Relay Service, or VRS, that allows me to have an interpreter on video on a call with me. It's just less nervous having an interpreter there. When I joined Sprint, now known as T-Mo, they were very, very accommodating in getting what I needed to use the service. And so Relay makes a big difference for people like me or people on your staffs. Relay has grown and improved over time. For myself, you know, if someone asks, what is it that you need? Then, you know, I am able to tell them what I need. So I would say in your situation to do the same thing. If there's someone on your team, specifically ask what it is they need as far as accommodation or service. I hope I answered that question right.
You did, thank you. Tatiana, do you would you mind doing the same also?
Yeah, and this is Tatiana. I am hard of hearing. I grew up oral, which for those who don't know, basically just grew up speaking and living in a very hearing world. So I come from Ukraine, and my family is hard of hearing, and I have deaf family as well. But in Ukraine back then, it very much looked down upon to have any kind of disability. So any way that you can try to fit in society, in the hearing world, that's what we did. So my parents did not teach us sign language, and they put us in the hearing world, and we tried to fit in as much as we could. And then we moved to America. I learned sign language. I learned how to speak English. And now I get to work for Sprint Accessibility, now known as T-Mobile, and have all the accommodations I might need, interpreters, captions, everything, you name it. It's beautiful.
Great, thank you. Katie, I'm going to pass it to you. If you would mind doing the same thing and also identify what are the tools that you use for your job.
Sure. So I feel the need to introduce myself all over again. It's like, hi, I'm Katie, and I identify as deaf with a capital D. There's a difference. Audiologically, I guess I'm technically hard of hearing. My hearing loss ranges 75 decibels in the right ear and 80 decibels in the left ear. For those of you who want to go and Google, there's a nice chart that will tell you roughly what you can hear, like jet engines, dogs barking, and that kind of stuff. So if you're trying to piece that into your world, I started out with a more mild hearing loss. It is progressive. It will get worse as I age. This doesn't bother me. I was born that way. My mother was the first in her family to go to college. She majored in speech therapy. Her last semester of school, she had me. She never actually finished school. So she has, I guess, 100% success rate in teaching people how to speak. So it goes from there. I grew up in Southern Illinois. I had no services growing up. The school did identify me as having a disability. I had a whole lot of social problems. Academically, thanks to my mother, I learned to read. Hooked on phonics did not work for me, but I did manage to become a pretty decent reader. When I was 16, I met my first other person my age that had hearing loss like I did. And they explained to me the difference between being an oral deaf person and someone who could sign. Oral meaning speaking, and then the whole deaf community with sign language. This really was eye-opening for me, and I decided that I wanted to meet other people, so I started to pursue when I went to college, pursue a degree in deaf education. So I met tons of other people and still had, I guess you could say, kind of an identity crisis, bordering on the fence, because I'd always grown up in the hearing world. And now here's this deaf world that's welcoming and open to me. And I decided to embrace it with a little push. I met a deaf man at my first university. It was a hearing university in Central Illinois. And he encouraged me to go to Gallaudet. So I attended and graduated from Gallaudet in 2011 with a degree in early childhood education. I signed up for a school program to go ahead and work with students teaching sign language and advocating for early childhood education. The school, for reasons that still remain a mystery, had decided to switch their philosophy to oral.
Jeremy, how are you?
Hi, good.
And this is just
We're getting some feedback on the line. Can people please make sure your lines are muted?
So with that, I had a beautiful opportunity through Schedule A hiring authority to work in my passion, which is recreation. And I walked up to Rocky Mountain National Park and asked them if they had any jobs. Using a Schedule A hiring authority, they hired me on as a seasonal employee. I have since become a permanent employee and worked through various jobs. And I have been fortunate enough to meet some really wonderful people who have been both deaf and hearing and super accommodating.
Okay, thank you, Katie. What I'd like to do right now is we still want to talk a little bit about, a little more about people who are deaf and hard of hearing, but our topic is on Fed Relay. So what I'd like to do is ask Kirsten if she wouldn't mind talking a little bit about Fed Relay. What exactly is Fed Relay for our listeners?
Kirsten here. Very good question. Fed Relay has 6 different types of relay services, and people often get confused. When they hear Fed Relay, they think it's one thing, but it's actually 6 different services. So we recommend that each agency meets with the person within the agency who needs accommodation or access and talks with them about what service would best meet their needs. It's not our job to recommend, obviously, a service for a specific person, because you want to make sure that your employee or staff member is heard and tells you what they need. The 6 services include Relay Conference Captioning, which we call RCC, caption telephone, which we call CapTel. That's for someone to place a telephone call and have captions on the phone. IP relay, that's where you're using a web browser and it can be on your mobile device to place a telephone call with an assistant in the middle of the call who reads your text aloud. Video relay service and video remote interpreting, so VRS and VRI. VRI is for in-person meetings, and speech to speech. Then finally, we also have something called TTY relay, which I'll go into later, but we have those 6 services and those are available to meet anybody's communications needs.
Okay, thank you. Now, based on what Kirsten just said, I'm going to ask all 3 if you would identify what are the biggest challenges that you have in your job and how does Fed Relay help to facilitate some of those. Tatiana, I'll go ask you if you wouldn't mind stepping forward to be the first to answer that question.
Yeah, this is Tatiana. I am not a Fed Relay user because I work for Sprint Accessibility. However, at Sprint Accessibility, as I mentioned, we do have Relay conference captioning, which Federal Relay does offer. And that allows us to join meetings and follow along with captions, live captions of everything that's being said on the meeting. And the cool thing about Relay conference captioning is that even deaf-blind individuals are able to use the Relay conference captioning to participate in phone calls. And the other thing I'd like to add is Relay conference captioning is not only for the deaf individuals to follow along with what's being said, but they can also participate by typing to the captioner in a chat box, and the captioner can voice for that person, which actually ends up working also for speech disabled individuals. I hope that answered your questions a bit. I know I'm not a Fed Relay user, but.
Oh, that's great to still identify some of the challenges and services. Katie, how about you? What's the biggest challenge that you face in your job as a person who is deaf?
Sure. So group meetings or meetings of greater than, I say 5 people, but honestly, it's really like 2 or 3. So setting up for Fed Relay to focus on the topic, they require 12 hours advance notice. And sometimes in my job, people call or something breaks, and I don't have 12 hours notice to get a group of to set up Fed Relay for captions. The other challenge for captions is that it's posted in a separate screen. It's not embedded into the actual video. So I have to be looking at people's faces to try to guess and lip read with some questionable internet, as well as reading over and hoping that the captioner got the correct information or was able to correctly interpret, I guess not interpret, transcribe the information.
Okay. I'd like to ask Kirsten, what is your biggest challenge in your job as a deaf person?
Kirsten speaking. I'm glad you asked me that. Tatiana and I do so well at Sprint Accessibility. And so I think it's kind of just a given for us and we don't even really think about the challenges. But when I think of other jobs that I've had, big challenges include large team meetings, trying to follow everyone and looking to see what's going on. You can't possibly read lips in a meeting with multiple participants. Captioning is always important. And just being included, right? Sometimes if you're not following along, you're just not being included. Captioning helps with that, but oftentimes I think of organizations having to plan ahead of time, like Katie was mentioning. I think that's with really any disability. Today we're focusing on deaf and hard of hearing people, but if you focus on someone who has another type of disability, they often also need to arrange things ahead of time, or the organization will be overwhelmed in trying to accommodate their needs. So really, if I could take a step back, sometimes I think, okay, if there's not enough time to prepare adequately for everyone in the meeting, then it should be rescheduled, go to the next day. Or another thing is outlines or notes. I would prefer sometimes to have an outline prior to the meeting because that will allow me to follow along quicker. In today's world, people want things right away and they want to do things just right now. So I would say a shift in paradigm, making sure that everyone there can actually be included. So that's a big difference, is to change other people's perspective to not think that way. It's not a challenge. It's just, everyone deserves to be included and deserves to be treated equally. So there needs to be plenty of time to get people's needs met before a meeting is hosted. So just changing a paradigm to consider that.
Thank you, Kirsten. One question I wanted to ask. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were finished.
Oh, Ray, this is Katie. I wanted to go ahead and add to that. It's huge, especially in the National Park Service. There are so many places that don't have good internet or don't have good connectivity or need extra time to arrange all of these accommodations because they're in remote, isolated, rural areas. And people still want things instantly. And it's just, you have to have that time to get there. There's been more times than not where my internet's failed, so I physically drive all over tracking people down, wasting more time out of my day when I feel I could be doing more productive work, just trying to communicate a simple message that could have been a 15-minute phone call.
Kirsten, I wanted to ask a question relative to the 12-hour issue. Now, I know that is quite frequently in many of our national parks for obtaining sign language interpreters. We always ask parks to check with your local provider, see what is the time frame. It could be a week or two advance notice. But we always say that even though you may have a 2-week advance notice, that if you get a last-minute call, you should at least attempt to try get that sign language interpreter at the last minute if possible. Is that also something that works with Fed Relay?
Kirsten here. Yes, that's a very good question. If there's a last-minute meeting that comes up and you want Fed RCC, we encourage you to go ahead and make that request. So even if it's less than 12 hours, make the request. We can't guarantee we'll be able to fill it, but we'll definitely do our best. It's the same concept of, planning ahead. Obviously, we prefer a 12-hour notice because then we can guarantee you'll have captioning available. But if it's last minute, we will do our best to still try to accommodate that request and make sure that you have that appointment filled and can have captioning.
Okay. And here's a question that, again, this is going to be either for Tatiana or Kirsten. How does any unit of the National Park Service begin to use RCC or any of your services? What are the steps that they need to take?
Tatiana, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, this is Tatiana. Thank you for the question. So each service is a bit different. For federal RCC, there's a form online at fedrcc.us. And of course, that's all on the brochure. And if you ever have questions later on, you can always email us. But for federal RCC, you fill out a form, basically, meeting information, the dial-in phone number, your name and date and time and everything, and you submit it. If it's 12 hours advance notice, we can guarantee the captioner. If it's less than 12, we will do our best. For a video relay service, that one is on demand. And so that allows a deaf person who uses sign language to make a phone call to someone who is hearing and uses a standard telephone. And that's on demand, so they just have to dial the video relay service phone number on their video phone software or equipment. And and then the interpreter pops up on their screen and they proceed with their call and conversation, and that's it. I do want to add, for each service, there is the need to provide the agency name or AB code, agency bureau code, which is how all the calls are billed to the agency. So RCC, that would require you to select the agency in the dropdown. And for video relay, the video interpreter will ask for your agency name or code. And then a feature of video relay service, it's called video remote interpreting, VRI, and that allows for in-person conversation, also on demand. And same thing, interpreter pops up on the screen, and I am deaf and I want to talk to my hearing boss. That interpreter is relaying that conversation back and forth from spoken English to American Sign Language and vice versa. Okay, so RCC, VRS, VRI, we have CapTel, caption telephone. The way to order that, it's actually a device, and it's intended for people who are hard of hearing, who may want to speak for themselves, but and listen also with really amplified sound, but be able to follow along with live captions if they miss a word or two. And the way to request that is through the CAP program. Your agency, Section 508 coordinator can place an order for the actual phone, and there's a couple of models available depending on the needs of the individual. That order request comes to us and includes things like your agency name, your email address, so we can confirm that your agency has a task order in place for this particular service. And then we approve the order, the device gets branded to that agency, gets sent to the individual, and every call that that individual makes on that device will be billed back to that agency. So that's CapTel. We have speech-to-speech for people who have speech disabilities, and that is also on demand, and it's a toll-free number that they would call on their phone. And the operators are trained to understand different speech disabilities. And I've actually experienced this myself, where I got a call. It was like a three-way call, and I could not understand what the person was saying. I panicked. I'm like, what is happening? And the operator repeated everything that person just said. And then when I responded, he could hear. And so he responded to me. It was really neat. So that's speech-to-speech. We have, I'm trying to think what service, TTY, good old TTY. I think most of you know what that is. It is analog. It also requires the equipment. And surprisingly, there are still agencies that have it and use it. The cool thing about TTY, if internet were to go out and there was an emergency and a deaf person needed to make a call, internet services are not as reliable, right? So TTY comes in handy in that kind of situation. So that's why we still offer and still have usage of TTY services. So RCC, speech-to-speech, CapTel, VRS, TTY. What am I missing? There's one more.
You are missing
relay.
IP relay.
Internet protocol relay. And that is also text-based service like TTY. And it basically, think of it as a TTY where you have an operator reading everything that the deaf person is typing out loud, and then whatever the hearing person responds, the operator types it right back. So IP relay is same thing, but internet-based. And so I would just open up my browser, make a phone call, operator voices everything that I type, and then whatever the other person says is typed back to me and I read. And so that's IP relay. So that's 6 services right there.
Thank you. Kirsten, I have a question for you regarding the captioners. How are your captioners trained to deal with the wide range of subject matter that they have to deal with? For example, with our national parks, we have such a wide range of names of parks, subject matter that is discussed within those parks, whether it's historical, archaeological, or technical discussions. How are the captioners trained to deal with all that?
Kirsten here, another good question. Thank you for asking about that. It's really important to prepare. When you have an interpreter or a captioner, both of those service providers need preparation prior to a meeting. If you know people's names or things like that. Like when I request an interpreter or captioning, I say, here are people who will be in the meeting, here are their names, here's what we're discussing. So I strongly encourage each agency, when you put a request for captioning RCC in, make sure that you respond later to your confirmation email. So book the appointment, you'll receive a confirmation email, reply to that email and give any prep materials that you have. The topic of the meeting, perhaps some keywords of the meeting. Maybe you'll be talking, National Park might be teaching people about insects, so you may have some science words that you'll be using. Give those keywords prior to the meeting. That way the captioner can review them and they can add those words into their vocabulary prior to the meeting. Sometimes if a captioner doesn't get prep material, say there is a name or a big word that pops up in the meeting, their software is not prepared for that vocabulary. So then they have to manually key in each of the letters of that unusual word. Remember, they're not using a QWERTY keyboard like we use. They're using a stenotype, which is a different type of keyboard. They have several keys that they punch at the same time to make one word. So if they can pre-populate those words, then they can use VoiceOver, and that just makes the call go quicker and the captions come quicker. So when
Great.
they are, oh, I'm sorry. Awesome. I just wanted to make sure I had answered your question completely. But allowing them to put those words into the vocabulary beforehand makes the captioning run smoother.
Great. Thank you for that. That's a great answer. Very, very clear. Also, with regard to using any of the services, are there any types of rules or regulations people need to be aware of as far as confidentiality? I do know that oftentimes people will say, as a result of using a captioner, a transcript is available that basically captured the call. Are there rules or regulations as far as the uses of those things?
Yeah, this is Tatiana. Good question. Our captioners and our communication assistants, interpreters, they all have to sign confidentiality agreement, and they also have to comply with the different rules and regulations, FCC requirement. Not only that, Federal Relay actually has to comply with GSA security requirement in order to provide these services. Now, I know you mentioned transcript option. That is up to the user and the agency. We have the ability for the transcript to be destroyed immediately at the end of the call and does not allow individuals to save the transcript to protect confidentiality in case it was a very confidential type of call. Or if it's not and users are okay with having access to the transcript, the agency is okay with users having access to the transcript, they can save it and reference it as notes. So it just depends on the agency, the nature of the call, and the users. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Now, I haven't heard any mention of CART. Does that relate to any of the services that you provide? And actually, if either of you wouldn't mind explaining what CART is for our audience.
Yeah, this is Tatiana. CART is more for in-person captioner for an in-person meeting, where they're sitting there, they have a equipment that they use to caption everything that's being said and a projector projecting it on the screen for everyone to see. And the benefit of that is that people in the room, if there's a lot of participants, a lot of people speaking up, the captioner is able to hear everything in the room and just caption everything that's being said. We do not offer card. Our services are specifically intended for telecommunications relay services. So it's intended for meetings and phone calls via teleconference, bridge, and that kind of setup, which I know from what I understand, a lot of agencies are working from home. So there's a lot more of the teleconference type of meetings. And that's where relay conference captioning comes in, RCC, because the captioner is dialing in remotely, but obviously would require a dial-in number and a way to join the meeting and caption everything that's being said into the mic.
Okay. I have a question that comes up fairly frequently, and that is oftentimes for public or community meetings or agency-wide meetings, the likelihood is, it is extremely likely that we will have people who are hard of hearing and people who are deaf as part of our audience, but we may not have gotten a specific request. So are there rules and regulations regarding what are the conditions that we can request or utilize ASL interpreters or captioners for these kinds of meetings, or both?
And this is Tatiana. I do want to clarify, with ASL interpreters, we do not have a service that offers the interpreter to join a meeting and interpret everything that's being said on the meeting. So for meeting, we would be talking about relay conference captioning. And I'm sorry, what was the question again?
If you didn't get a specific request, but we can pretty much assume that there will be multiple people out there that probably need captions, can that service be provided through Fed Relay?
Yeah, so this is Tatiana. Thank you for repeating that. So we do actually have a lot of agencies that will make their webinars accessible by booking relay conference captioning. They might not know if there's going to be a deaf individual joining the call or the webinar, but that is their way of making sure that their content and their meeting is presentable or accessible. So yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. I also want to just very quickly check in with Cecily Wood. Cecily, do we have any questions from our audience right now? I want to make sure that we are not avoiding those questions.
Sure. Yeah, we have a couple of questions from the chat box. So for deaf people who speech read, is VRS an appropriate service to request? Can that be combined with relay conference captioning?
And
I'll jump in on that one. It depends on the individual. If they don't have the ability to sign or they don't know sign language, video relay service will not be helpful in any way to them. So I would recommend just doing the captions. If you have someone who does both sign as well as utilizes lip reading, then yes, that would be an option. But I would recommend, if you can, to ask the person which they prefer or if they would like to.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we have a lot of questions about, is there a way to add RCC into, like embed it into the Teams meetings or Zoom meetings or WebEx? I know Tatiana's smiling, but yeah, it's a popular question and trying to embed that. And then also, you know, what's the difference between the auto captions versus a live captioner in that whole situation?
Great question.
Kirsten here. I can answer that one. As far as embedding goes, right now, the only platform where we can embed RCC, we can embed it into YouTube Live. Oh, what's the other one, Tatiana? I can't think of. Adobe Connect. That's it. Adobe Connect and WebEx. Those three platforms you can embed RCC. In the future, we may add additional platforms to that. I realize that's frustrating, but at the moment, those are the only three that allow the captions to be embedded. If you're using a different platform, we would recommend setting up 2 screens. Or if you're using Microsoft Teams, you can have Teams on the top half of the screen and then RCC on the bottom half of the screen, so you can still see the meeting and the captions at the same time. Tatiana, would you like to add?
Thank you, Kirsten. And I wanted to add, on our team, what we have people also do is pull up the live captions on their phone or iPad and watch that separate from the meeting, or maybe they have an interpreter on their screen. They don't want to overwhelm their screen. Or of course, if you have 2 monitors, you could set it up. So whatever works for the individual.
And Kirsten, could you talk a little bit about the last part of that question, which dealt with auto speech recognition as opposed to a live captioner? I know that's an issue that a lot of people who are deaf struggle with at times.
Kirsten here, certainly I can. Auto-generated captions oftentimes don't work. Obviously, it depends on the platform, but it can't fully track the conversation if it's auto-generated. If you have a captioner, you also can, if they have a question or need clarification or need someone to move closer to the microphone, they can use the chat feature to do that. The other difference with auto-generated caption, that's obviously artificial intelligence, AI, is what's generating those captions. It's a machine, right? So it's trying to pick up the words, but often the words that it gets are incorrect. Captioners can make judgment calls on what they're hearing to type out the actual word, and they can also make corrections to those if those are needed once they've typed them.
Very good, thank you. Cecily, any other questions coming in?
Ray, this may be a question for you, but since FedRelay cannot currently provide a live interpreter on Teams like we're on right now, how would you recommend setting up an interpreter for an online call besides VRS?
Actually, I'm going to ask Christy if she wouldn't mind jumping in on this one.
Perfect.
I don't know that I have a good answer. I mean, I think you three might have a better answer on that, but I'm guessing that you're going to need to set that up through an interpretive services, like probably the company that Jenny and Susan work for. Katie, do you have a better version?
Yes. Yeah, you can't get interpreters into live meetings like we have here in Teams without having a participant themselves be an interpreter. I personally use VRS. It is my absolute favorite one out of all of the questions because it's on demand. So if I have a spontaneous meeting, I can have an interpreter. And lucky for me, I actually put them on an iPad next to my laptop since I don't have a good setup. And then I flip back and forth that way between the iPad and the laptop so that it works for me that way. But yeah, for Teams WebEx, without hiring a live interpreter to participate in the meeting as a participant, is right now no go.
And you're saying VRS, and again, I just want to clarify the acronyms, Video Relay Service. And I'll speak from my own perspective on that. As a person who is blind, I have been doing disability work for more than 40 years. And back in the early days, the only way that you could communicate with a person who is deaf using a telephone was using what Tatiana referred to as the TTY. As a person who was blind, I was not able to use a TTY because that device at the time was not accessible. frequently what I would do would be to call a hearing person that I knew that had a TTY, and they would contact the person who was deaf, and they would act as the relay person for me. Right now, I am equal in terms of being able to communicate with colleagues who are deaf because we do use video relay where I will speak and the video relay interpreter will facilitate the communication between me as a person who was blind, which would be the same as a sighted person, speaking to a deaf person who was utilizing that video relay service. Cecily, any other questions?
And if I can, this is Tatiana, I wanted to add, we are going to look into what we can do for the next Fed Relay contract because we understand the need for interpreters to join on a meeting, remote meeting. So that is something we're going to take into consideration for the next contract.
Okay, thank you.
This is Kirsten. Can I quickly add on to that as well?
You can.
One thing I wanted to mention, you know, you may be wondering why that's not already part of the Fed Relay service. It's because technology has changed so much. You know, online meetings weren't popular when this contract started. I understand now that's a frustration, but obviously it's something we want to look into for later. Telecommunications has just evolved so much over the years. So hopefully this is something we can provide later in the next contract.
And I imagine that COVID-19 is also something that amplified the need for online meetings. And that's something that as more facilities, both government and private sector, realize how effective it is, it's probably something that will continue in the even greater as we go into the next couple of years at least.
Oh, yeah.
One question that did come up that I would like either of you, Tatiana or Kirsten, if you could answer. Somebody had indicated that many of their coworkers are a little bit afraid or intimidated by Fed Relay and the use of the system. What hints or what things can you do or suggest that might minimize that?
I can start and then Kirsten, you can jump in. This is Tatiana. So I think most of the time we are afraid of something that we are not sure about or we don't have a full understanding of how it works. So to start, I would say if you have questions about a particular service or you're nervous for a specific reason, we provide training, you know, free training. We can do that remotely and explain all the services and how they work and answer any questions, any concerns you might have. If we might not have the answers on the spot, we'll get back to our team and get clarification, get back to you. You can even email us at federalrelay@sprint.com and ask us any question. That's what we're here for.
Great, thank
you.
you.
Want to add anything?
Kirsten here. Well, I guess I would say the same thing Tatiana said. I mean, it's not that bad. I know at first it might seem a little overwhelming, but it's simple. For example, for RCC, you just fill out the form, you know, give people the link and then share that link with your team members and everyone can read the caption. So Fed RCC shouldn't be overwhelming. It's very simple. I agree with Tatiana. If anyone has concerns, tell them to email us, federalrelay@sprint.com. We'll reply to that email and just make sure any of questions that they may have are answered. Kate, do you want to add to that?
I do. My my experience in calling my coworkers on Federal Relay has for the most part been kind of negative. It took me quite a while to get them used to the idea of answering a voice that may or may not be mine. A lot of it that I went in person and talked to them and had to explain beforehand, and it required a lot of prep work. Like, hey, I'm going to call you. It may or may not sound like my voice. I may have a beautiful voice from, you know, a Hispanic male or somebody or, you know, a high-pitched voice or something that just sounds completely different. And it's okay, it's still me. We're still having this conversation, but just recognize that I can't use the phone, and in a lot of locations, I don't have any other means of communicating with you. It actually took about 2 years to kind of get that paradigm shift, to get some of the more people who are more set in their ways to accept phone calls from me, where I didn't have to drive across the park in person to deliver a 15-minute message.
Great, thank you. I'd also, if you wouldn't mind explaining when you use that term voicing for me, what does that mean for people who are not used to speaking to people who are deaf using an interpreter?
Sure. So when I go on, I've spent many, many years working to make 19 to be exact, in regular and routine speech therapy, almost on a regular basis, to be able to produce a voice that sounds somewhat comprehensible. I'm lucky. Not all deaf people are able to do that. It just doesn't work out. And it's not their fault. It's not any fault of their training. But that's the way it is. So they have an interpreter who can speak on their behalf to make their message more clear. And to make sure that they're understood and that they have an equal voice in a meeting when they may or may not be able to voice for themselves.
Okay, thank you. Cecily, I want to come back to you. Any other questions that haven't been answered yet?
Yeah, for a last-minute VRS call, will an interpreter voice for the deaf person too?
I'll take that one. Yes, they will. I've had no issues with that. If I don't think that their message is clear, you can always ask for another interpreter on the VRS call, and they will transfer to somebody who might match your signing style a little better.
Okay. Anything else, Cecily?
Right now, let's see. Oh, does Federal Relay, give me just a second, it moved up, provide an interpreter or audio description or captioning services for Facebook Live?
No, this is Tatiana. Oh, go ahead, Kirsten.
And this is Kirsten here. I was going to answer it at the same time as you. No, we don't do an overlay caption in that setting. It would be a link, so it would be the same concept where under the post, you could put a link and say, click here to get captions. So that person would open two windows at the same time, one for the Facebook Live feed and one for the captioning feed. I think technically right now we just can't do that. Eventually, I think each of the platforms online will be able to embed captioning, but at this point, we don't currently support Facebook Live to embed. But again, you could just on that same page put the link to captioning so people could open it and read the captioning as you're going.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have come to the end of our time for the day, and I do want to thank all three of our panelists for the time that they've given us and then sharing their expertise, and also in sharing aspects of their own personal life and sharing that component of their life that happens to be a part of each of them, and that is their disability. I also want to thank Kirsten for providing the brochure that will be posted in the Common Learning Portal so that you'll be able to access more information in the future about Fed Relay. I also want to give special thanks to Cecily Wood. This will probably be the last call that Cecily will be involved with. She had handled all of the technology and provided a lot of support in making the first four of these calls go smoothly. Christy Rugg will be taking over those duties as we go into the future, but I do want to thank Cecily for all of the work that she's put into this. Thanks for all of you who have joined us today as our audience. Our next call does not have a date yet, but the topic is going to be addressing people with intellectual and cognitive disabilities. If you have any suggested topics that you would like to know about, that you'd like us to consider for future disability dialogue calls as a part of this series, don't hesitate to contact us, and we will be glad to consider those suggestions. Thank you very much. This call has been recorded. It will be available through the Common Learning Portal. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.